Why is Love Bites metal, but Band-Maid is not? And can HANABIE help us work out the reason why? Well, look, okay, first of all, considering we're talking about metal, I have to be 100% clear. I know this is something that a lot of people care about, but I myself have always been somewhat dubious about how relevant genres are anyway. I think they can be very useful for giving us broad ideas of, what kind of sound a band is going for or things like that. But there's a lot of people who really care about this, who will very much bristle if you say something like, Band-Maid do a song that's metal, or this Love Bites song isn't metal. And even with HANABIE, who have their own genre, Harajuku core, a lot of people get very upset if you were to mention that they, were doing a song that was more poppy than it was metal. And this is an interesting subject because I have seen about this so much in my comments. And once again, this is going to be an off-the-cuff episode where I'm going to try and explain what I think metal is by, first of all, somewhat disproving that metal is a genre at all. All right. Yeah, so I'm probably getting a lot of people pressing thumbs down and unsubscribing already. Just follow me with this. All right, so anyway, the main crux of how we're going to be looking at this is first of all to start with what really the difference is between Love Bites and Band-Maid. Because as I say, Love Bites are generally considered to be a heavy metal band, and people will very much protect their honor as a heavy metal band, often using them as almost like a definition of heavy metal. Whereas when it comes to Band-Maid, most people will say they are hard rock. And, even talking about them as being metal, people will kind of raise their eyebrows a little bit. This is me sort of generalizing what I've heard from the fan bases. And yet I think this is actually a very difficult definition to really clarify when looking at what the differences are between these two bands. Now, musically, yes, they are very different, but what does make Love Bites metal and Band-Maid not metal, and can we use that to further understand what therefore metal is as a definition different from hard rock? Well, first of all, I would say the place that we probably could look easiest is the drumming. See, when you look at Haruna's drumming, it is extremely double kick intensive. There is a lot of double kick usage in there. So you think, okay, intense double kick usage. Well, in all fairness, it's not like Akane doesn't do that quite a lot as well. There are a lot of songs where Akane uses a lot of heavy double kick drums. So how much double kick drum do you have to be to cross over the border from hard rock into heavy metal? I don't think anyone's going to really be able to put a quantity on exactly how many times per second you have to hit the double kick drum and how regularly for it to be a heavy metal song. I think that's just a technique which we associate with metal, and this is a theme that's going to come up a little bit more as we carry on. Is it the vocalist? Well, when we look at Asami, she has a big, glorious sort of operatic style voice, but most notably, she is singing big, clean, beautiful vocals, the sort which are not exclusive to heavy metal. I mean, for example, I think as most Love Bites fans will know, Asami actually started off her career, she's done a lot of backing vocal for things like R&B, and it would be fair to say that her voice would work just as well in something like R&B, in sort of more poppy, or even maybe with a little bit of, getting used to the genre, she could do something operatic. It would work for her as well. So I don't think exclusively her vocals could be considered to be definitionally what makes them metal. And it would be fair to say that Psyche, although again, she's got a very different style voice, is, well, again, she's singing these sort of big, clean vocals. There is a similarity in kind of tonally what they're going for. So is it that? Maybe the best way of looking at it is to look at the guitars, because as we all know, Love Bites love their big dramatic guitar solos, and boy do they create long guitar solos, which usually are crafted beautifully with Miyako and Midori playing off each other, having these building up and swelling of guitar solos. It's amazing, and yes, it would be fair to say they have a lot more than Konami usually adds to a Band-Maid song. And I don't say that as any detriment. Once again, I have no preference between metal and hard rock. In fact, I'm here to kind of say what I think the definition's a little bit of a squidgy place that we can't really find clear lines in the sand. But it would be fair to say that Love Bites do have more focus on their guitar solos than you would get in a Band-Maid song. One of the things I like about Band-Maid is they focus on keeping the guitar solos very concise, because they're just kind of there to pass you on to the next thing, whereas Love Bites have these big, huge guitar solos that are almost like a centerpiece of their own, something that people look forward to very often in the songs. So is that it? Is it guitar solos? Is that the only thing that makes a difference? Well, if Konami plays less guitar solos than Miyako and Midori, well, who plays less than her? Matsuri from HANABIE. And this is where we get into an interesting point, because HANABIE don't really focus much on guitar solos. And again, this is something I like about them, play to your strengths. Whereas with Lovebites, Miyako and Midori's combination is a very strong thing. I don't think that's because it's metal. I think that's because they're Miyako and Midori. I think it's because you have two really good guitarists, and you have Miyako's history of classical music, which is why you get these guitar solos that less sound like twiddle exercises, and they're more sort of arpeggios and these building sort of flourishes that are much more like something classical. I think that the signature sound of Lovebites' guitar solos is more a Lovebites thing than a metal thing. And in the same way that Konami's shorter guitar solos are much more in line with the fact that she is a songwriter who focuses, I mean, she very much writes the whole songs, and they're usually quite concise. She's big on these very sort of concise and much shorter songs, and therefore, you know, having a quickly passing guitar solo makes sense. But in the same way, the strength of HANABIE tends to be more towards songs that have lots of crazy changes in, you know, sonic things happening all the time, you know, shifting from one section to another very quickly, completely changing tone on the fly. That's a very big part of their sound, and therefore guitar solos virtually never come up at all because they're playing with so many other things. So that brings us back round to HANABIE. Are HANABIE therefore a good indication of metal? Well, they've given themselves their own genre, Harajuku core, and this is something I am going to come back round to in the end, because I actually think this is very important, and I think it's a really great final point to come round to. So I'm going to leave that off for a little bit for anyone who's screaming at the screen, oh, they're not metal, they're Harajuku core, because by the same token, like I said, a lot of what is the impetus behind me doing this video is years of doing these reactions and seeing your comments and knowing what the fan base as a general seems to feel. And well, HANABIE fans, for all the Harajuku core, they really think of them as a metal band, and I think most people would see Harajuku core almost as a kind of a play on the word metalcore. We think of them as being a metal band, and therefore their sound is metal. So, you know, whatever you think, if I told you that HANABIE was more pop than metal, you'd probably object. And, you know, if I said they were more hard rock than metal, people would probably object. If I said they were any other accepted normal genre than metal, people would probably object, because whatever we think, most people consider them to be a metal band, and yet they hardly ever do guitar solos. Similar thing to actually with Band-Maid here, in that obviously Matsuri is the chief songwriter, and therefore her job is very much about crafting the songs, and so she doesn't put a huge amount of emphasis on putting big guitar solos in the songs, because that's not even really, you know, she doesn't have to have a solo, she doesn't have to leap forward, she's more interested in that kind of you know, giving the song a much more concise arrangement, as opposed to the sort of more grand, expansive sounds that we get from things like Lovebites. These are just differences in technique, and yet it does leave us with this question, where in the sand do we draw the line and say, that's metal? Well, okay, so I thought best thing to do, I am going to just try and get some kind of guide. If it's not to do with guitar solos, it can't really be defined by looking at double kick drums, which on its own would be a very curious thing to make as a definition at all. It can't be done on vocals. You know, if it can't be done on any of these things, maybe the best thing to do is to look at what an AI would say. I know, they usually have terrible answers, but let's just see. So I had a little bit of an AI question time. I said, can you give me a brief explanation of what the accepted difference between hard rock and metal music is? Now, it went through a few things. I'll just quickly read. It said, absolutely, hard rock and heavy metal are closely related. They have distinct characteristics, though. Hard rock, which emerged in the 1960s, is blues-based and tends to be more melodic, with catchy hooks and sing-along choruses. I get that. I mentioned things like Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, Aerosmith. That's kind of the place where, if you asked me, I would put Lovebites. I would say Lovebites, therefore, are more hard rock than metal by that definition. Heavy metal, which developed in the late 1970s, it says, is more aggressive, featuring distorted guitars, fast tempos, intense vocals, often with high-pitched screams. Another thing that, of course, we have to come around to eventually. It also leans into themes of power, darkness, and fantasy. Now, this is an interesting point, because when it comes to screams, obviously, that would mean of these three bands, HANABIE would therefore be the only band who could be considered to be metal on that term, because they're the only one who uses screams. But I think most people would accept screams as not, although it's probably one of the things we most associate with metal, it's probably one of the very few techniques that only appears in metal and not really in any other genre. I would say it's fair to say, though, that you can't say that's the entire definition, because I think most of us accept there is metal that doesn't involve screams. So what about those themes of fantasy? Well, yes, again, this is something that Lovebites, they play much more on these fantastical images. We get things like the wolf and all of this, and again, this comes up in things like babe metal. But, well, HANABIE, they're usually talking about everyday life. You know, there's songs like Pardon Me and We Love Sweets, these and even Neat Game. These are songs much more rooted in everyday life kind of things. So once again, this is not a definitional factor. These are not things that on their own could be considered to be, well, the definition of metal. So as you can see, the only real way we can approach this is by collating several things together, and several quite disparate things, because this does feel like a game of rock, paper, scissors. Whatever you choose, you get beaten down by something else. Now, of course, the other way of looking at this, a lot of people have said to me, and this is a word that I wouldn't usually bring this up, but people have mentioned this when this conversation's come up before, metal's just more intense. The dictionary defines intense as the quality of being intense. Very useful. But it's the measurable amount of a property. The intensity of something is how much there is. So by metal, we would say just more. More. Something that's really packing it on, that has a lot of thickness, a lot of layer to the sound. I mean, that might be true, but then, I mean, think about some of the bands that have a lot of things going on. I mean, you could say Wagaki Band, arguably, are they metal? They have more in their sound than most other bands. I mean, they're blasting more at you than I would say even Lovebites. I mean, Lovebites have a lot of stuff going on, but do they really have as many things happening at the same time as Wagaki Band? I don't think so, but then you could bring in all kinds of things. What about a brass marching band or an orchestra? Are they metal? You know, I mean, Tokyo Ska Paradise Orchestra is probably the most metal band ever if it's just the amount that's going on. And it can't even be loudness, because when we're talking about genres where everyone's basically playing the same instruments, we are talking about drums, we are talking about vocals, and we are talking about, you know, guitars. Loudness isn't really a thing. So intensity, I don't think, is a particularly easy thing to describe unless we're just talking about the emotional intensity. And then again, that is super subjective. So intensity also has to be taken off the board, because I would say that Band-Maid can be extremely intense. They can do songs that are very, very tense at times when Lovebites can be also doing songs like Glory to the World that are not so intense. They are just sort of big and freeing. Again, I don't feel the word intensity gives us an answer. So where does this leave us? Is metal a thing? Well, I think metal, to sort of put one more nail in the coffin before I give a better explanation, in my opinion, I think metal kind of has had its work cut out ever since there have been so many sub-genres of metal. And this is kind of an interesting thing. Often when I'll say, oh, this song's kind of got a bit of a death metal vibe, someone will come up and say, oh no, that's thrash metal, or this is like some kind of doom metal. And you hear all these different definitions. And I think the problem is that certain types of metal might have screams, certain types of metal might have more guitar solos, and all the things we've talked about might be indicative of different types of metal, but then have no crossover themselves. And you just end up with this blur of things and just all these subgenres. It doesn't really add up. So, what is metal? Is it anything? Well, here's my best explanation that I can give. I think metal has two definitions, two uses, if you will. The first one is the purely musical one, which I think it is basically not so much a genre as it is a set of techniques. Each of these techniques implies kind of like, if you like, that intensity. It implies that you're trying to be as full on and aggressive as you can. So that could be double kick usage. It could be very fast guitar solos. It could be scream vocals. But ultimately, these are just a set of techniques. And the more you use them, the more intense something could be said to be had. But if you say that metal is a set of techniques that can be used in, you know, varying amounts, or with, you know, one being used and the other being dropped completely, this doesn't really therefore give you the ability to say anything is metal as a defined, that's only metal, it's not hard rock, unless it uses just all those techniques. If you've got a song that is just constant double kick drums, constant screaming, and maybe constant twiddling riffs, then yeah, okay, maybe that could be described as being solely metal because it's using all of the techniques all the time. But I think the rest of the time, metal is just a sliding scale. It's not, this is metal, this is not, it's a sliding scale. I think the line between Band-Maid and Lovebites with metal is not a clear line in the sand. It's just that, okay, I would say that Lovebites more often use the sounds that we traditionally would associate with metal, but I think they've got a lot of hard rock qualities. And before you get angry with me, I personally think that's a good thing. I think having that is on your side. And this brings me into the second definition of metal. And the reason why some people might get upset when I say, well, I think the Lovebites are as much hard rock as they are metal, and Band-Maid very often lean into the metal as well. And that second definition is purely that I think metal's a little bit of a subculture fashion-based thing. And I don't mean that as in fashion, as in you're walking around wearing the latest thing from like some sort of shop in the mall. Very 90s term. I think it's more that there is just this collective of people who very much, that's their thing. That's their world. It's kind of like the fashion associated with sort of the dark, the dramatic look. Those themes, when we talk about the themes of the fantastical, those kind of themes, they're at the end of the day, the themes, in the same way that, HANABIE can sound extremely hardcore without having to sing about anything so dramatic, just singing about everyday life. These are themes that are not really things that ultimately colour the music, but, talking about fantastic themes, that comes across in sort of the fashion. There's a lot of mythology behind groups. You see the covers to a lot of heavy metal albums. That's not a musical thing, but you can see they're going for that sort of dark imagery, the fantastical imagery. There is kind of like a lore, a culture, a fashion, a style that's built around it. And interesting enough, the closest similarity I can think of to this is when you hear people talk about rap and you hear them talk about hip hop. Rap very much is associated as just like a style. It's a style of music, it's a style of vocal delivery, whereas hip hop is the fashion that goes around it. It's certain themes, it's certain cultural things, it's all this kind of stuff that, you can do something that is rap, but is not necessarily hip hop. You can do, like, if you've got a Japanese group who are like some of the groups I know, like Castella Park. Castella Park are rap because they do rap stuff. But they're not really hip hop because they don't really do any of the sort of things that are associated with the fashion and the style of the culture that is usually comes up around traditional old school rap and such like. One of the interesting examples was in the song Influencer by Band-Maid. There was a section where Psyche did a very quick vocal bit and everyone was like, oh, this is the rap bit. And it was kind of funny because I was thinking to myself, it's not really rap, but yeah, okay, I can see that. Whereas you might ask some people who are a little bit more into the hip hop side, they're a little bit more rap traditionalists. I mean, I should point out for anyone who doesn't know, I'm a very big supporter of rap music. I think it gets a terrible rap, excuse the pun. And, so I'm actually very much a supporter of that genre. But if you ask some people who are more traditionalists, who kind of think that everything about rap has to look like hip hop, they might go, oh, no, that's not rap. That's not rap. Because they are more thinking about the culture and the feeling that goes around it than the musicality of it. And so, I think there is that second definition where it's not even a musical thing, it's just kind of the culture and the style that you appeal to. And so this, to be honest, I think is the easier one to look at. Unfortunately, it's not really a musical definition. It's and so I'd be very cautious when people talk about the music and say, oh, musically, this is metal. I think that's actually a much harder thing to say than you might think. If you really consider the factors that make up metal and how unique they actually are and how ubiquitous they can sometimes be, I think it's very difficult to look at something and say, that is metal, unless it just constantly is playing full on to the stereotypes. Like I say, unless it's a song that is just mostly scream vocals with double kick drums all the way through and maybe tons of guitar solos, it was very hard to think of a way that you could say that this song is not hard rock, it's just metal. I think it is a sliding scale towards certain musical techniques. Anyway, there is one last thing to add on, and this is where we get back round to HANABIE, and this is why I think what HANABIE have done here I mean, funny thing is that I've said before, I'm not a massive fan of scream vocals, but I have I have this love for HANABIE and a lot of what they've done because I feel, apart from their work ethic of touring constantly and all these kinds of things and their sort of creative flair, well, that's one of the things. I think that they've done something very clever in regards to the metal genre and its place in Japan. See, when baby metal arrived, baby metal fused together idol pop with metal. Things like this had been done, but they were the ones who really landmark made it a serious thing and made it work and just made it something that people could take seriously. And they called it, the genre kawaii metal came out of it. And I don't know whether they coined that themselves, but it was a genre that came out of it. Now, this Harajuku core thing, I don't know if HANABIE are expecting Harajuku core to be something that everyone takes forwards and says, oh, yeah, there's going to be a wave of Harajuku core bands now. I think actually what they're doing here is they're just giving themselves a genre, because if you give yourself a genre that is one that you've made up, then it's kind of like you're saying, look, we don't actually want to be part of a group. We don't want to be stereotyped as a thing. We're just us. Our genre is HANABIE, and if you want a genre word for that, Harajuku core. We're Harajuku core. That's what you can call our genre, but really that just means HANABIE is HANABIE. And I think the reason that this is so appropriate is because they are, as I mentioned, on that scale. They are using a lot of metal techniques, but notably, their songs are not 100% metal, in the same way that I would say that Lovebites are not just constantly using metal stereotypes techniques throughout. They haven't got scream vocals, they haven't got any of these things. They are more than just a metal stereotype. They are a band who leans towards metal things, but ultimately is more than that. And HANABIE are doing this in a much more clearly focused, obvious way, in that obviously you listen to their songs and the little bits of EDM will come in, and then Matsuri will start singing like what might as well be a punk bit in the middle of the song. They'll have pop bits, there'll all these bits coming in. And as I've mentioned, I've had people in the comments, not a huge number, but I've had a few come in who've been kind of critical when I've said, oh, HANABIE, oh, there was this pop bit in the song that I really liked. They're like, oh, no, HANABIE wouldn't do pop. And the truth is, no, they would. They would include these techniques in the same way they use metal as a technique. All of these things are techniques that they use. And one of the things that makes Japanese music so interesting, one of the reasons why so many of us love Japanese music, I mean, obviously, I have been here in Japan for years, but, I was brought to it for the fact that, Japan was doing stuff that you couldn't hear anywhere else in the world. That's what really made Japanese music stick with me. And I feel a lot of you folks at home who've commented on these channels that I do have said similar things, that Japan is doing music that we don't get anywhere else. And a lot of the reason is because of this kind of just not being restrained by genres. Every genre is just a set of techniques. It's just a palette of colors that you can choose to pick up and use a little bit of that. Then, try a little bit of this. It's a set of colors that they can mix together. Now, yes, Lovebites is a band who have probably quite a traditional sound in a lot of ways. I think this is why they appeal to a lot of old school metalheads, and I totally respect that. They bring a kind of a updated sound. But I think as well, when you look at what Miyako is doing with the writing, I think that they are bringing a real intelligence, a real craft to it that is, they're bringing a lot of, just sort of, they're modernizing it, but not in a kind of, I don't mean that like gentrifying your local apartments. I mean, they're modernizing it in a way, they're bringing it up to date. They're using a lot of the experience that the genres and, these various techniques have built up. You've got Band-Maid. Band-Maid are technically a hard rock band, but they'll lean into pop. They'll use techniques of metal and have songs that certainly lean into the metal territory, where I would say, oh, that's a metal song. And then HANABIE, they've got songs where it'll go out of metal, it'll go into pop, it'll go into EDM, all these kind of things. And so I guess my end feeling on this is just like the name Harajuku core suggests for HANABIE. Really the best genre to give any band is just say, you are you. If anything, if it's too easy to give a band a genre, then that probably just suggests they're not being very original. They're just doing something you've heard a million times before. Genres for me are just, especially in Japan, a country that mixes genres so willingly and so easily, genres are just a set of techniques. In the same way that metal has its guitar solos, its double kick drums, its scream vocals, but you don't have to use them all the time. In the same way you've got things like, pop. It has its kind of like rooted EDM style drum beats. Ironic that I was using that. It's catchy choruses. It's melody focused. It's clean vocals. These things, none of them are exclusive, but they're just things where you can say, this band got a little bit of metal, it's got a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So, yeah. Band-Maid, they got a little bit of metal, they got a little bit of hard rock, and they got some pop qualities occasionally as well. Lovebites, they got a little bit of metal, and they got a lot of that hard rocking energy, occasionally going into sort of like, they even got like a punk-like quality, they go so far sometimes, and I say that with a lot of love as well. And they've even got some big poppy kind of like almost like show tune style choruses in places. And in HANABIE, well, they're just Harajuku core. Anyway, there you go. Those are my thoughts on metal specifically, but moreover why genres as a general tend to be pretty useless as anything other than a guide, and certainly something that I wouldn't hang your colours to a particular thing and say, I only listen to this genre. But hey, you might want to be part of that culture. If you're part of that culture, if you're big into like hip hop, if you're big into metal, you might want to be part of that culture. But just as the bands, don't let it limit them. Don't let it limit you. Love what you love, but be open to different things. And then you too can have the Harajuku core mentality. Anyway, there you go. Those are my thoughts. As always, get in the comments. Tell me what you think. And until I hopefully see you very soon in Japan for the next one of these. For now, ciao, ciao.